Hello. I know you have heard of chord tones before, and you've probably heard of non-chord tones, but have you heard of accented non-chord tones and chromatic non-chord tones, otherwise known as embellishing tones? Have you heard of the anticipation, the suspension, the pedal tone? We're going to talk about all those today. So welcome to a lecture on accented and chromatic embellishing tones. So first of all, what's an embellishing tones? Oh, pretend that's not there yet right now. Well, we could do it. Most people call embellishing tones non-chord tones, NCTs. But since Laitz also wants to include chordal leaps, and chordal leaps are not non-chord tones, right? They're chord tones. Laitz ends up using the broader label of embellishing tone to mean non-chord tones plus chordal leaps. So in your homework, your analysis homework, I do want you to label NCTs, non-chord tones, but don't label all the chordal leaps, because really you're going to find chordal leaps all over the place. And the only exception to that would be if you're labeling contrapuntal expansions, then you can label your CLs, like if you're going between 1 and 1/6 or between 5 and 5/6. So, yes, exactly. That's what I said right there. Okay. So, what's an embellishing tone? First of all, we have the plain old, everyday, boring embellishing tones. No offense if you are an everyday embellishing tone. But we learned these already. Chordal leaps, of course. Passing tones, neighbor tones. Now, we have some fancy new embellishing tones. Accented passing tones, so accented P's, passing tones and neighbor tones. Chromatic, passing tones and neighbor tones. Accented and chromatic, passing tones and neighbor tones. So if you, same tone is both accented and chromatic. Suspensions, Appoggiaturas, anticipations, and pedal tones. Now, you will notice there, if you look carefully, that 3 of those are in bold. Accented passing tones and neighbor tones. Suspensions, Appoggiaturas. Those are the ones that are most important, and those are the ones that we're going to focus on most today. Not a coincidence. So, passing tones. Let's review. Well, okay, now let's review. So, passing tone. Use the abbreviation either P or PT. I think Laitz is kind of inconsistent about it. So, passing tones, by definition, are always going to be unaccented, right? Otherwise, we call them accented passing tones. So, passing tone is unaccented relative to the notes that come immediately before and after. The middle note of the 3 notes that have a passing tone in the center, the middle note, the passing tone is the middle note of 3 notes moving in the same direction, either up or down. So let's take a look at these. I made you cute little pictures. Strong, weak, strong, weak. Let's assume this is one bar of, let's say, 4/4. These are all quarter notes. Strong on beat 1, weak on beat 2, semi-strong on beat 3, weak on beat 4. Okay, and then that dividing line shows you middle of the bar. So the C-D-C is consonants, dissonance, consonants. I'm going to use that same structure the whole time. This is not the note C, the note D, the note C, unfortunately. Okay, consonants, dissonance, consonants. Here, so everything we're talking about today is dissonances in some way, right? They are non-chord tones, which makes them dissonance. So in the past, we have learned this simple version where you have a passing tone structure. This dissonant note, if you find a dissonant note, let's pretend this is a C major chord, this note's a C, and this is an E, and then you really do have a D here in between. C, D, E. The D doesn't belong in the C major chord, right? It's a non-chord tone. So you say, what kind of non-chord tone is it? First thing you notice is that it's unaccented relative to where it came from and where it's going to. And you notice that they're all going in the same direction stepwise. So that makes this an unaccented passing tone, just a plain old passing tone. So it's a middle note of 3 notes moving in the same direction, either up or down. We could take the same thing. Imagine a C major chord. This could be an E, a D, and a C. Right? This D, again, doesn't belong in the chord. This is the exact same thing. So it's a dissonant note. We say, what kind is it? Well, it's on a weak beat relative to what comes before and after, relative to the 2 consonances. So it's just and all the notes are going the same direction, so it's just an unaccented passing tone. We just label that P or PT. So, just to remind you, we are talking about non-chord tones. So that passing tone is a dissonance. If it weren't a dissonance, you wouldn't have to pay any attention to it, right? If this is all C major, and then this is a G, an E, and a C, all those would be consonant. So we're only talking about if you see a note that's not in a chord, but it's in the measure with the chord, then you have to figure out what kind it is. So far, we've learned that it could be a passing tone or a neighbor tone, which we'll get to on the next screen. And now we're just going to learn some more categories, like accented passing tone, chromatic passing tone, etc. And then just to point out here, in this normal case, the passing tone itself is the dissonance, but the notes immediately before and after, these Cs, are consonant. And I do note that the exception here is that you could have two passing tones in a row, and I even made a little picture. It's literally littler than the other ones. A double passing tone. So consonants, dissonance, dissonance, consonants. Imagine again that this is all a C major chord, and this is the note C. This is a B, an A, and a G. So if it's a C major chord, the note C and G are consonant, and then you have some passing tones in between, right? So perfectly fine. These guys are on weaker beats than these. So now what happens is we get a new category, which is the accented passing tone. I do have pictures on the next screen, but they're not on this screen. So if you are waiting on this screen for pictures of accented passing tones, unfortunately, you're going to be waiting for a long time. So for accented passing tones, the dissonant note now appears on a stronger beat than the notes immediately before and after. And I have a picture on the next page. We're just going to have to wait to see it. Okay, and then chromatic passing tone. This is actually nothing that special. For chromatic passing tones, the dissonant note is just it's not just a non-chord tone. Like imagine we're in C major here, right? This is E, D, and C. This is a non-chord tone. It wouldn't be just that. It would be that it's also not even in the scale or key. So maybe this would be a better one, but let's say this is a G up here. This is an E, and this is all in a C major chord. So E, G, and you go E, F, F sharp, G. So then that F sharp would be chromatic because it's not in, and we're not in the key of C at all. The F is just a normal passing tone. The F sharp would be a chromatic passing tone. And then one last thing, which is just that your chromatic passing tone could be on a strong beat, in which case it would be both accented and chromatic. I don't know if we see examples of those, but we do see lots of examples in this whole presentation. So if you like examples, you're in for quite a treat here. Okay, this is an additional set of pictures that I think is going to help out. Passing tones, unaccented. This is what we saw on the last screen. They could be going upward, or they could be going downward. Exactly the same thing we saw on the last screen. Notice that the dissonances here are on weaker beats relative to the consonances. Whoa, that triangle moves crazy. So now, I guess it's a rectangle, isn't it? Here we have the same idea, but just accented. So we're going to take the same structure, just scooch it over a bit. Whoa, look at that scooch. So now the dissonance, the little red dot, is strong relative to the consonants that comes before and consonants that comes afterward. And the same thing here. You could be going down, you could be going up. That's the same. So that's just the difference between accented and unaccented passing tones. And I don't have anything special for what happens if it's chromatic. Okay, neighbor tones. Again, a little bit of review, but before we get to the accented and chromatic neighbor tones. So neighbor tones, label them N. You could do NT, and I bet Laitz does that once or twice in the book. But ultimately, if we have accented neighbor tones, we can't label those ANT because we need to save the abbreviation ANT for anticipation. I know. Right now, you're thinking, wow, that's so many steps ahead. And it's true. So we're taking that same diagram from the last page and just adapting it. We have a consonants, dissonance, consonants. Let's again say we're in C major. This is an E, that's an E, and that's an F. The F is dissonant with the chord, and it's really just an upper neighbor to that note that's there. And we could do exactly the same thing and just have a lower neighbor. So again, say that this could be the E, and this could be the note D, and this could be an E. And this would all be in a C major chord. So consonants, dissonance, consonant, dissonance is on the weaker beat. So that's a normal neighbor tone. So normal neighbor tones, the dissonant notes, right, are unaccented relative to the notes immediately before and after. It is always going to be the middle note of three notes moving first in one direction and then returning in the other. So, either going up and then down or down and then up. It's a returning tone. And that neighbor note is always going to be a dissonant note, but the notes immediately before and after are going to be consonant. And then in Britain, I believe, I don't know if they still call these auxiliary notes, but they do at least sometimes in old treatises. Okay, now we're just seeing what happens if you take the whole structure and scooch it over to the right. And so that's accented. Now you can see the dissonance is accented. It's on a stronger beat than the consonance that comes before and after. And we have the same thing here. It could be a lower accented lower neighbor, accented upper neighbor. And by the way, I think in previous classes you may have labeled things as LN and UN, a UN for upper neighbor and LN for lower neighbor. You can do that. I mean, I don't require you to do that. I think Laitz does it in some chapters, but by this point, he doesn't usually pay that much attention to it. So I also do not. Okay, so for an accented neighbor tones, the dissonant note now appears on a stronger beat than the notes immediately before and after. And I guess that's all we needed to know about that. And then now for chromatic neighbor, it's going to be the same thing as before for chromatic neighbor tones. The dissonant note isn't just a non-chord tone. It's also not in the key or the scale. So let's imagine that this whole thing is in C major, right? And let's call this a G, an A flat, and a G. The A flat is a chromatic upper neighbor to the G because A flat is it's not just a non-chord tone, but it's not even in the key of C major. So you could do that. And similarly, you could still do that if it's shifted so that the A flat is accented. And then just a last thing, it's perfectly fine for a single note to be both accented and chromatic. Possible for a neighbor tone to be both accented and chromatic. Okay, so now let's take a look at what happens when we get incomplete neighbors. And you may be wondering to yourself, like, what is an appoggiatura? I think a lot of people do wonder that, and some of them don't even know it. So there could be people walking around all the time that you see. Maybe next time you're walking down the street, notice if anybody is thinking to themselves, what is an appoggiatura? And they might not even know that they're thinking that. So I think it's a good idea to stop people on the street sometimes and say, can I tell you what an appoggiatura is? And they will often say, thank you. Let's go on. Okay, incomplete neighbors. What makes for an incomplete neighbor? You have an unaccented dissonance, right? Normally. It's going to be related to some other note that is a consonance, and it's going to be related by step to that other consonant. So it's either going to come before or after the consonants. Now, an incomplete neighbor is not that tricky to figure out because it's really just like a neighbor tone, but either the preceding consonants or the following consonants is missing. We are going to get pictures on the right, I hope, at some point, but I guess we have to get through the words first. So we have now the idea of what would happen if we had an accented incomplete neighbor, right? Following the theme of what we've been doing so far. We had passing tones at first, and we tried out accented passing tones. We had neighbor tones, and then we tried out accented neighbor tones. And, we're throwing in chromatic there too, but accented is more like the tricky thing. Now we have incomplete neighbors, and we're saying like, whoa, what would happen if we had an accented incomplete neighbor? And it turns out that for the most part, we're just going to call an accented incomplete neighbor an appoggiatura. I'll show you, there's some accented incomplete neighbors that wouldn't be called appoggiaturas, but you're never going to see them, interestingly. So I want you to have this definition. Accented incomplete neighbor equals appoggiatura. Now, that is important because the term appoggiatura is used by everybody all the time in completely different ways. So if you just look it up on Wikipedia, you'll find a bunch of definitions for it. If you look it up in the dictionary, you'll find different definitions. If you hear people talking about it on the radio, which I've heard before, they can sometimes use just random things. So it's important to have a definition of appoggiatura that comes directly from our book. So in reading directly from our book, I was able to figure out what Laitz thinks an appoggiatura is. And an appoggiatura is an accented incomplete neighbor. And we'll see examples, so don't worry. There's one other way to think of an appoggiatura, and it is useful. An appoggiatura can also be thought of as an unprepared suspension. So we will do suspensions on the next page, But for now, just recognize that there is an additional way that you can think of an appoggiatura, and it'll be helpful down the road. So let's see if we get some pictures. Yeah. Oh, this is just totally in the wrong order. I wonder if I have... Okay, cool. So normal complete neighbors, just like we saw on the previous screen, right? Consonants, down to a dissonance, up to a consonance. And that's the lower neighbor. We could do the same with the upper neighbor. And there the dissonance is on the weak beat. So that's just normal neighbors. That's not even accented neighbors. Let's now explore what happens when we just omit one of the consonances. So these are going to give us incomplete neighbors. On the first side, we can omit the second consonants. So we have consonants going to dissonance. This is sometimes called an escape tone. And that is a valuable thing to remember, but Laitz does not use that term. You could also conceivably have a dissonance going to a consonance. And then the same thing would be with the upper neighbors. As you can see, I'm just taking this structure and omitting, in this case, I'm omitting that C. In this case, I'm omitting that C. In every case, the dissonance is on the weak beat, and it either goes to a consonance or comes from a consonance. So that's why we call them incomplete neighbors. Okay, now, maybe I should just, let me say one thing. So here is the way, like, if you go around music looking for incomplete neighbors, they will probably be hard to find. But if you go around music looking for notes that don't fit in the chord, and let's say you find one here, and you're like, that's weird. It's a note that isn't in the chord. It's not a passing tone because it doesn't keep going in the same direction. It's not a complete neighbor tone because it doesn't go back to this original note. Then you just have to say it's related stepwise to this consonance. It's not clearly related to anything over here. So I just have to call it an incomplete neighbor. And the same thing would be here. You go along, you find this note, it's a dissonance. You're like, that's interesting. You look before it and there's nothing, that you can make that much sense of. So you can't call it a passing tone. You can't call it a neighbor tone, complete neighbor. You have to just say, it is stepwise related to this consonant. So it's an incomplete neighbor. That is the thought process of this. Okay, now we get to appoggiaturas. What is an appoggiatura? As you know, because it says it right here, and it says it right here, and it says it right here, and because I said it a couple times, an appoggiatura is an accented incomplete neighbor. So let's look at these. Every single one of these is all unaccented. The dissonances are always unaccented. Let's just scooch them over. Bum, bum, bum. We're taking this structure and moving it so that the dissonance is on a stronger beat. This is weaker, that's stronger. So consonance, dissonance, right? That is now, that is an accented incomplete neighbor, but you basically never see the structure. And so we're not going to call it appoggiatura, but I did include it there for completeness. Probably should not have. So for right now, ignore this one. This is the common one. You have a dissonance on the beat that resolves to a consonance by step. And then again, this one is not super common. It's not common to go from consonants to just an accented dissonance with nothing else. But this one is common. Dissonance on the beat resolving stepwise to a consonance. So dissonance on the beat resolving stepwise to a consonance could go up, could go down. See, came a little late, but I crossed those out. Now, when we are thinking about these guys, this one, dissonance on the beat going to a consonance, sometimes what people will tell you, like a definition will say, is you leap into this dissonance that goes into the consonance. That just means it didn't come stepwise, either from above, because then it would be neighbor, or from below, because it would be passing. Same here. You could leap into it. That's one thing to note. And then the other thing is that most of the time, this is a half-step interval. This one is almost always a half-step interval. Appoggiaturas don't really work unless it's a half-step. So leading tone going to the tonic, for instance. This, you can sometimes see a whole step, but it's very common for it to be a semitone as well. So you want this consonance, but you arrive a semitone above and then kind of slide down to it. Or you want this consonance, you arrive a semitone below and slide up into it. That's the way to think about it. Okay, so let's listen to an example. This is right from the textbook. I also recorded it using a mellotron. This is like a super cool old, it's not a synthesizer exactly. What they would do is they go and record violins playing, or flutes or whatever. And each key of the mellotron had a little piece of tape that played a recording of the violin or the flute or whatever playing. And so it's used, if you listen to Stairway to Heaven, it's used on that. But I ended up using the mellotron for all these different excerpts for today. Just a reminder, Appoggiatura by definition is an accident incomplete neighbor. That's pretty good, isn't it? I hope it wasn't too loud for you. It was a little loud for me. So what are we looking at here? All the non-chord tones are circled. So in this chord, this is a C minor chord, and there's an F circled because the F is a dissonance with the C minor chord, and the F is just a momentary replacement of the E flat, which is the consonants. So this is a case, like we saw on the last page, this is a D, a dissonance, that comes on the beat and slides down to a consonance. And that's going to happen actually in every single one of these circled things. So this C is circled. It's a non-chord tone. The chord is 5. We're in the key of C minor. So this is a G, B, D, F chord. The C is not in the chord. It's a non-chord tone that's going to resolve down to the B. It's going to kind of slide there by step. It's on the beat, so it's a dissonance. Notice these things that says 4-3. 4-3 is the measurement against the bass. So from a C up to an F is a fourth, goes down to a third. From a G up to a C is another fourth that resolves down to a third. Are all these 4-3s? That's a 4-3 as well. A flat, so it's a D. So notice that's an augmented fourth, but that doesn't matter. It's just a 4 within the key. A flat up to D resolves down to C. So a fourth going down to a third. F up to G, that's a ninth going down to an eighth, an octave. Here, another 9-8, an A, G up to A flat is a ninth, resolves down to an eighth octave, and then another 9-8. C up to D is a ninth that resolves down to an octave. Every single one. So in the 6th chord, the D is a non-chord tone resolving down by step. In the 4 chord, F minor, the G is a non-chord resolving down to F by step. In this chord, the A flat is a non-chord tone in the G chord, which resolves down by step. And in this chord, the C minor chord, the D is a non-chord tone resolving down by step. Now, later in the presentation, we talk about suspensions. These look like suspensions because they say 4-3, 9-8. Those are terms for suspensions. However, none of these things are being prepared. If there were an F in the previous bar that prepared this note before it resolved down, then this exact thing would be a suspension. So when I said in the previous page that you could think of, for an appoggiatura, the first thing I said is you can think of it as an accented neighbor that's missing the consonants before it. But now I'm saying, and this is probably more realistic eventually, is that you can think of this as just as like a suspension that hasn't been prepared. There's no F here that's preparing this as a consonance, which to be a dissonance here that resolves down. But when you have that, you have a suspension. Let's give it one more listen. I'm sort of worried about the volume, so I'm going to pause this. I'm going to change the volume on all these tracks. Yeah. Okay, here we are talking about suspensions. So, suspensions are always going to be dissonant. The suspended note is dissonant. This guy is the suspended note marked with an S. It's tricky, that means strong. And strong, that means weak, weak. This means suspension. This means dissonance, consonants, consonants. Okay. The suspended note is always going to be dissonant, but it's going to be prepared by a consonance, and it's going to resolve to a consonance. So in a second, we'll see that this one is the P, the preparation, and it's tied over, and then this is the R, the resolution. So suspensions are always accented. Notice that the dissonance here comes on the strong beat, marked with an S. The note that is dissonant, which is, this note here, is always going to be accented relative to where it resolves to, and usually accented relative to how it's prepared. But it could be prepared from earlier from a strong beat. But it's definitely going to be dissonant relative to where it resolves. The suspension is always prepared, so now we have our little P for preparation, suspension, and what's going to come there. But let's focus on P for preparation. Preparation is always going to be consonant. Note that the dissonant note is always prepared, tied over. Doesn't really have to be tied, but we're just pretty much always going to tie them so we can practice paying attention to suspensions. So it's always going to be prepared, tied over from previous consonants. This thing has to be consonant. And yeah, we'll get to the resolution in a second, but for right now, I just want to point out this idea that we said before, which is that if you had a suspension that wasn't prepared, and we'll do unprepared retardation next, it would be an appoggiatura. So in the previous screen, we saw what would happen if you have a dissonance on a strong beat, resolves by step to a consonance. That would just be an appoggiatura. But if you prepare this note in the previous beat as a consonance and tie it over, all of a sudden the exact same thing becomes a suspension. So that's why you can think of an appoggiatura, if you're trying to remember what it is, think of it as an accented incomplete neighbor. But when you're looking at music, what you'll often notice is you'll say, oh, I bet that's a suspension, but you realize it's not suspended over from anything. And you'll be like, aha, it's an appoggiatura. It's like a suspension, but it's not one because it's missing the preparation. So either one of those could be appoggiaturas, right? Dissonance going by step either down or up to a consonance. Now, suspensions are always resolved, and specifically they're always resolving downward by step. So consonance preparation on the same note, the dissonance is there and it resolves downward by step. However, it is possible to have the same structure and resolve it upward. We just don't call it a suspension. We have a dissonance that resolves upward, just like here, and it's prepared with the consonants. But in that case, it's much, much, much rarer, and we give it a different name. We call it a retardation. So retardations, you'll encounter about 1 every 100 times. All the other 99 times or more, you will encounter suspensions. So suspension is the thing to remember, but if you have to remember what is an upside down suspension that resolves up, it's a retardation. Okay. And then here we can remind ourselves that a kind of incomplete suspension is an appoggiatura. Or this one now, we could see it as incomplete retardation. Okay, let's listen to this little example. This is also played on the mellotron. And now all we do is hold over the first note, the top note. So I don't know if you right now have just had an aha moment. I probably should have prepared it a little better for you to have the aha moment. So let me try it again. Here's just a plain old 2-part counterpoint, right? That's 1 against 1. For every 1 note in the lower voice, there's 1 in the upper voice. So this is a 10th or a 3rd, right? This is a 6th. This is a 6th octave, 3rd octave. We have chords there. 1, this is not a complete 5-4-2 chord, obviously, but it's functioning that way. It's got the 7th of the chord, the 5 chord in the bass. 1 6 chord, 7 6. 1 5 1. Okay, now, and let's say this is what we wrote originally, and what we want to do is introduce some suspensions. The secret, this is like an important secret to figure out, and it makes it pretty easy. All you have to do is look for places where there is downward motion by step. So here, the C is moving downward to the B. So to create a suspension, all I have to do is to hold the C over a little bit longer and then allow it to resolve to the B right here. And that's what Laitz does here. He keeps the bass line exactly the same. But here the C, the bass moves up to the D, and he just holds the C over a little bit longer. It's now a dissonance against the bass, and then it resolves down. So this one measure has a single suspension in it. Let's look at what kind of suspension it is. So this is the interval of a tenth. That's a consonance, right? This one here is a sixth, and so it eventually becomes a sixth. That's the structural, that is the main interval that's there. This is the original interval. And Laitz just holds over the C, creates a dissonance. What is that dissonance? It's a seventh. So that's why he writes down here 7-6. And notice that it doesn't change anything about the chords. It's still 1 going to 5-4-2. It's just that you have to wait for the C to resolve to a B before you know what the real tone is. Let's look at this measure. I will play the example again. Maybe let me do it one more. Let me do it right now. This is the top line. And now the bottom line, just holding over a lot of the upper notes. Doesn't it sound like cool psychedelic music from the 60s? It should. Maybe the 70s, but it'll be early 70s if anything. Okay, let's look at the second measure. Here, so I was saying you could do this anywhere where there's downward motion. This voice keeps moving down by steps, so you could do it anywhere in there. Laitz is going to do it both in the same way in this line and this line, or that measure and that measure. So A is going down to G sharp. All you need to do, you know that this is a consonance and this is a consonance because we did it as two voice counterpoint. This is a sixth, that's a sixth. He's going to hold over the A. This is a sixth. It's when the B comes in, it's going to be B against A, which is a seventh. And then the A is going to resolve down by step. It was prepared, it's suspended, and it resolves down. And that resolves to the G sharp eventually. So we're going to have the interval of a sixth, a seventh, and a sixth again. And that's what we get here. A sixth eventually goes down to a sixth, but first it's temporarily got a dissonance. Now notice that dissonance, the suspended moment, is it's on a strong beat relative to the resolution, and that dissonance is prepared by a consonance, right? Because we just held it over from there. So it's prepared by a consonance and it resolves down by step to another consonance, a sixth. Okay. Same thing in this bar, just a different bass line. Now we're going to look at the same thing in four voices. By the way, suspension's definitely tricky. What we did, I'm going to go back to the previous screen for a second. What we did here is tricky, but I assume that you could look at it and you can pretty much understand it, the way I just explained it. If not, go back and listen to that again. But this one, there's four voices all of a sudden, and even if there weren't any suspensions, it's just still a lot of stuff. So I expect that this looks like a lot of stuff. So I'm going to talk you through it. Hopefully it will be less confusing. Let's first give it a listen. Basically what's going to happen is we again have one against one against one against one. Everything is in half notes here. Half note, half note, half note, half note, half note, quarters, but just walking down in the bass. Half note, half note, half note. These are all chords we know. 1, 7, 6, 1, 6, right? A little passing structure. 4 chord on the way up to 5. And then 5, 5, 4, 2. We know that 5, 4, 2 always goes to 1, 6. And here it does, 1, 6. And then 5, 6 going to 1. So incomplete neighbor structure. So we can make sense of what's going on here. Now all these arrows are pointing to where there's downward motion. So there's a lot more downward motion that's not marked. So Laitz is just choosing some of the things. So here he's going to choose just the G going down to the F sharp. And when we get down here, all he's going to do is hold over the G for half the duration of this F sharp and then allow it to resolve down to F sharp a little bit later. He's then going to choose this A going down to G and just hold over the A a little bit longer before it resolves down to G. That's what he does here. This G eventually is going to go down to F sharp, but he's going to hold it over a little bit longer before it goes down, right? That's what you get there. He does the same thing in the tenor voice, so you don't have to do it only in the top voice. Here's an alto, here's soprano, soprano. Here he's doing it in tenor voice, so the D is resolving down the C. It can just hold over the D a little bit and eventually resolve down the C. That's what you get there. In all those cases, it's the duration is kind of like dotted half and then quarter. But here he's going to do it as a smaller value, how do I say this? Okay. Eventually you have, I don't know why he syncopates the C, but well, forget it. In any event, the C is going to go down to B. He's just going to hold over the C a little bit longer, but he does even syncopate the D, and I don't know why he does that. There's not a suspension reason. So this C before, it's ultimately going to this B, and that's going to produce a G major chord in first inversion, but it's just obstructed first by this C. And then this A going down to G, he says, I'll suspend the A for a little while and then resolve it down to G. So that's what you get. Let's give it another listen. It's the top. Hey, that was the first listen, wasn't it? Anyway, still mellotron. This time I think it's the violins, several violins patch. The mellotron has a bunch of different patches because they would just record different instruments, and then you could choose which ones you wanted, which tapes you wanted to play when you press the buttons on the keyboard. Okay, so you probably have an idea of all the stuff that we just talked. You probably understand basically what we just talked about so far, because everything I said on the screen so far is the same as it was in the past screen. It's just that now it's more complex because there's 4 voices instead of 2. I want to call your attention to 2 things. First of all is the Roman numerals. You might look at this. You might see this and say, it's A, C, G, A. Huh, that's interesting. It's probably a 2-7 chord, right? If you ignore this F sharp. However, you should not do that. You should, you're doing your Roman numeral analysis. You look at this and you see A, C, G, A. But you should make yourself notice this tie. Make yourself notice that this G is not a real tone. It's not a chord tone. It is a suspended note. It's tied over from before. Since it's a non-chord tone, the G is not in the chord. The note that it's going to resolve down to is a chord tone. It's a consonance. It's in the chord. So you should ignore this G, and you should take the F sharp as part of the chord instead. So the chord is not a 2-7 chord. It's A, C, F sharp, A. Therefore, the root of that chord, F sharp, A, C. So this is a 7-6 chord. Now, because we're in the key of G, right? That's exactly what the Roman numeral was here. So the basic idea is that all these Roman numerals are going to be exactly the same down here. It's just that it's trickier because there's more stuff. You have to reduce out the suspensions. You have to find the suspensions first, then figure out how to ignore them, basically. You have to figure out to ignore this G and instead pay attention to the F sharp, which is the main note here. With this G here, you have to find the real chord. You have to find this A as a dissonance, get rid of it, recognize it's just being tied over its suspension, and the G is the real note. So let's look at these from ground up. We have B, D, D, and at first it looks like B, D, D, A. That would be a 3-7 chord. But if we can notice that this A is a suspension, it's tied over from before, and it's not a chord tone, it is not a real note, the G is the real note, then we will find that this is a B, D, D, G. So this is a 1-6 chord. And that's exactly what's the Roman numeral here. So to get the Roman numerals right, you have to reduce out the suspensions. You don't pay attention to the suspended note. So let me see if I have this. No, I don't have it on this screen. I have it on a later screen. But what you're going to do is see where this says 7-6 here. Hope you can see my mouse. Put parentheses around that 7. I promise I'll do it on a later screen. And so that you know to pay attention to the fact that it's a 6, like it's a 6-3 chord. So above this A, the A is the third, because this is a 6-3 chord, it's first inversion, so F sharp is the root. With this one again, 7 is in parentheses, the 6 is the real note, so the G is the real note. This is a 1-6 chord. So that 6 makes sense there. This 6 makes sense there. This is a 4 chord. If we forgot about that C and we tried to include this D, we would get C, D, E, G. We would get a C major chord with a D in it. We would be like, what? That's weird. Something's wrong. So we have to go back and figure out, that's a suspension. Let's get rid of it. The real note is the C, and then it's just a plain old 4 chord. So 4, there's no 8 in this thing, but that's just because you don't need to say that there's an octave. Okay, and then this last one, this is hard to read, but this says 5-2, 6-3. Now that looks like a complex figure, and it is a complex figure. But I want you to memorize it. So what's happening is there's a suspension in the bass here, right? We know that originally it did this. It was a 5 chord. The D goes down to C, then goes down to B, and the B is the third of a 1 chord, a 1-6, right? And so then we know here, okay, the C is not a real note. This is a G chord, including this note B, but the C is temporarily occluding the B. So to figure out the Roman numeral, we know in our minds we have to get rid of this C, and we have to include the B. So the Roman numeral for real is B, G, D, G, right? It's a G major chord in first inversion. That's how we get 1-6. And the C is a non-chord tone. But in all these other cases with the non-chord tone, there is just like one number. But in this case, since it's the bass, we have to measure everything against the bass. So we get a really weird figure here, this 5-2 thing. C up to G, that's a 5th. C up to D is a 2nd. C up to G is just another 5th. So we get 5-2. And then once the C moves, we have to measure it again because the bass is moved. So B up to G is a 6th. B up to D is a 3rd. B up to G is a 6th. So that's how we get this 5-2, 6-3. So just try to remember that figure, 5-2, 6-3. I'll show it to you in another video. Let's listen one more time. So one little tiny thing I'll point out here is that, I don't know if you notice this yourself, but this first example is just a voice leading exercise, right? And you don't get any feelings when you listen to it. I mean, I don't. I liked hearing the mellotron, but it's like I don't feel anything. These things, these suspensions, like it's algorithmic. Like you can program a computer to do it. You can program the computer to look for a place where the voice is going to go down by step from G to F sharp, and then just tie over the G for half the duration of the F sharp. But it does all of a sudden make it beautiful and passionate, and it sounds like there's meaning in there. I mean, it's I have no idea why it is, but suspensions are very powerful emotionally. And in all my studies of creativity is really something that's weirdly in between being creative and not being creative in a sense. So it's like, in order to be creative, you have to learn all these techniques as if you were a computer. You learn these algorithms for how to create a suspension here if you want one. And then when you do it, weirdly, it works. And it's kind of like a computer basically can express something really intense. Or like when we listen to a computer play this music, even if the computer programmed it, it could feel very intense. But in any event, you want to train your brain to be able to do those things. And then when you are in a state where you are feeling a lot of emotion and you want to write something, you have these techniques available to you and you can use them. That's my lecture on life. Okay, so I did mention on the previous screen that the harmonic analysis is going to stay the same whether you have suspensions or not. So we will get to practice that a little bit more on the screen. Here is more mellotron. I can't remember which, is this brass maybe? Let's see. I forgot to get rid of the click track on that one, but at least you could tell I was playing with a click track. So in that example, we have so we're in C minor. We have one chord, 7-6. and 1/6. Let's look at just that measure. We know that those are the chords because we have the Roman numerals here. If we had just the music, we had to figure it out. We would see here we have a C, E flat, G, C. We know that that's a 1 chord in C. Then we have D, D, F, C. We need to look at that and say, okay, that is not a 2/7 chord with a B that's like a chromatic neighbor. Instead, this C is tied over as a consonance from the C was consonant here. It is now tied over as a dissonance in this chord. It's going to resolve down to the B. Once it resolves, then we have a B, D, F chord, which is a 7/6. First inversion, 7/6. And then this just goes to a plain old 1/6. So you need to be able to look at this and say, like, aha, that is a non-chord tone. It is an accented non-chord tone. It's tied over by being prepared and then resolves down on a weaker beat than it arrived on. Okay, so it's similar to, I believe I have it, yes, similar to putting parentheses around this 7. You see this figure below, it says 7-6. You will know that almost all the time that means that the first note is a dissonance. It's a non-chord tone that's going to resolve to a consonance. So you include the 6 as telling you what chord it is, not the 7. Let's apply the same logic here. Actually, there's nothing to apply. It's just a 5 chord and then a 5/7 chord. Then when we get here, we have, so this D is a consonance. It's being tied over here, and it's a dissonance. So how do we know it's a dissonance? Let's take a look. We have C, E flat, G, D. Similar to what we had on the previous screen. If we just get a chord, we're looking at this, if we don't know it's a dissonance, we get C, E flat, G, D. That's not a chord. It's like a C minor chord with a D in it, or it's a C minor chord with a 9th but no 7th. Like, that's not a chord that we have in classical music. So we know that at least one note is wrong. It's not the chord. So anyway, it's this D. This is a non-chord tone. The real chord tone is there. This D is resolving down by step. That's a good sign. Let's check to see if it's prepared. Yes, it's prepared. Hence the PSR. So this D is prepared as a consonance, resolves down to a consonance by step. It's a dissonance on a strong beat. I went ahead and put the bracket around the 9. The 8 is the real note. So really just this is a 1 chord. Whoa, look at that. 5-2, 6-3. Have we seen that before? I think we have. It was on the previous screen, and I said you should try to remember it because it's a tricky figure, but it always means the same thing. 5-2, 6-3 always means that there's a suspension in the bass voice. So let's check this out. Let's say we're analyzing the music. We don't know that it's supposed to be a 5/6 chord. We just see that it's a C, G, G, D. If we see that, we will presumably be surprised, if not frightened. We'll say, hey, that's not a chord. C, G, D. So all we know is that at least one of those notes is wrong. Could be any of them, but one of those notes is not in the chord. So then we see what happens next in the next beat, and the C becomes a B. So at that point, we can see that the C is tied over too. So we are like, aha, maybe the C is the non-chord tone. Let's check it out. C, if this were a dissonance, it resolves down by step to B. It was tied over, it was prepared as a consonance in the previous chord. If the C is not the chord tone and the B is, then what chord do we have? We have B, G, G, D. That's just a GBD chord. It's a 5/6 chord. So we put 5/6. But then we have to do the figures. We know eventually it's going to be a 6/3 chord, right? 5/6 above the D. Above the B. There's a D, which is the 3rd, and then there's 2 Gs, which is the 6th. So it eventually becomes 6/3. But at this moment, we have this weird figure because above the C, you have a G, which is a 5th. Another G, another 5th, and then a D, which is a 2nd. That's why we have this 5/2 going to 6/3. Anyway, then it comes back to 1. You're preparing a suspension there. You're introducing another preparation so they can overlap here. Let's just check out what's going on. This says 7/6. We know that we're going to need to put a bracket around the 7. What we really want is a 6th above. It's always above the bass. Always measure suspensions above the bass, by the way. So what's a 7th above an F in this key? It's an E flat. E flat resolves down to D, which is the 6th. So it's only when it resolves down to D that we have the real chord. Let's check out what the chord is. D, A flat, F, F. So D, F, A flat. It is a D diminished chord in the key of C. That's a 2, so it's 2/6. And then 5 with that F. And then this is a C chord. That F is still suspended over. The F is a non-chord tone in the C. It's going to resolve down by step. So it's a preparation, suspension, resolution. It's a fourth above the C. That's going to resolve down to a raised third. Oh, and Laitz messed up here. He called that minor 1, but it's not the case. It's a major 1. Why does he have a major 1 in the key of C minor? In the key of in a minor key, it's because that's a Picardy third. So yeah, the 4, we can get rid of that. We know it's not a real chord tone. This is really just a major chord in root position. So natural by itself means natural third. Just if there's no, if you're not saying having any other numbers, it's 5-3. So this is a 5-4, you could say, becoming 5-3. So the fifth above C is G. It's there the whole time. And then the fourth going to the third, raised third. The Roman numerals, we got to fix them. Sorry, Laitz. But I guess you should be apologizing to us. Let's give it one more listen. How you guys doing? I'm actually doing pretty good. I think I've had maybe a little bit too much coffee, but I don't know. You got to drink a little coffee every once in a while to really, really like PowerPoint. Then I don't know. It's kind of worth it. All right, let's keep going. And fix those. Okay. Great. Now, what we have are, I guess in the past I've gotten bad reviews for not, every once in a while you get fancy students and they also want to learn they want to do suspension techniques that are appropriate for, fancy people. So if you yourself are fancy, or if you know fancy people that might be pleased by your fancy suspension techniques, then this is for you. Okay. I know, that one's awesome. You guys don't have to say anything about it. I think that is the sound that they used in Stairway to Heaven by Zeppelin. So, fancy suspension techniques. Okay. This is very similar to what we saw on the last screen. I think I should maybe go back there for a second. I'm going to go back to the previous screen. I think we have exactly the same structure here. Let's check it out. 1, 7, 6, 1, 6, 5, 1, 5, 6 with a bass suspension, 1, and then 2, 5, 1. All in C minor. 1, this is like a 7, 6 with a decoration thing, but the bass is moving at the same time. We'll come back to that in a second, but then 1, 6. So that's the same. 5 in this measure, going to 5, 7. Then back to 1 again. So this is all the same so far with a double suspension. Then this is a bass suspension, but it's just decorated. Then back to 1, and then this time instead of going 2, 5, 1, he goes 5 for a while, and then a 1 with, again, Picardy third. So this is the same exercise. It's the same chords, basically. It's just that now he's made them everything more fancy. So let's look at all the things, and he thankfully labeled all these for us. So up here we have an embellished suspension. So the C, B, C is what we originally had. And then now it's just before we get to the B, we're decorating the suspension itself. C, A, B, B, A, B, C. I got to do it without the notes. And a good rule of thumb, you don't need to remember this, but it's always the suspended note that's decorated, not the resolution. So you always put your decorations in during the duration of the suspension, not on the resolution. So it's prepared, then it's suspended with some decorations, and then resolution, and then you go back again to 1. Down here in the bass, if you remember what we had before, just ignore this G. We had C going to D, going to E flat. Now, this is important, and it's always difficult to understand or at least explain, but imagine that this D is still there here, and there's no G. In that case, this would be a 7-6 suspension. It's a 7-3 right now, but that's because the bass moves. But when the D is still there, then C, B. Okay, it goes like that. So D, C, D, B. That's a 7 going to a 6. But the bass is allowed to move at the same time that the top line moves. So you get D, C, G, B. And at that point, just this, it's not 7/6 suspension, it's 7, and then it goes to a third because the bass moves. So if you saw 7-3, you would have no idea what to do. So you would normally see 7-6, but you just have to be aware that the bass could also change at the same time, and then it's going to mess with the figures. Okay, just going to a 1/6 chord, 5, 5, 7. You get to a 1 chord, and this time you're holding over 2 of the voices. So before, all we did was hold over the D, and then it eventually resolved down to C. Here we're also holding over the F, and the F is going to resolve down to E flat. So that's called a double suspension because it's happening in 2 voices at the same time. Now, something also interesting is that here, this D is the suspension, right? Dissonance on the beat. It's resolving down by step. So that's the R. It is prepared as a consonance in the previous beat, but he didn't have a tie there. So he's like re-striking the suspension. And I said before that we're going to always include the ties just so we are calling attention to the fact that these are suspensions. But it is perfectly okay to re-attack the note that you have prepared. So basically, in your mind, think of the way to prepare a suspension as normally you prepare it, then you tie over to the dissonance, and then you resolve down by step. But just then also give yourself a secondary rule that says, you could get rid of the tie if you want to. You could just strike the note again. So when I'm doing, all these recordings I made with instruments that sustain, but if I were doing this on piano, I usually re-strike my suspensions because otherwise you don't hear very well that there's a note sustaining. Okay, bass suspension, C eventually goes down to B, but we're decorating the suspended moment, right? So again, decorating the suspension duration, not the resolution. Here you have some double suspensions. Once you get to the G here, G, F, the C and the E flat are not in the chord. They're going down to the D and the B, right? So that's 2 notes that are suspended at the same time, double suspension, just like before. Now, the last new idea is this retardation. So what is a retardation? We remember from before, a retardation is an upward resolving suspension. So every suspension, if you're calling something a suspension, it resolves downward. So the suspended note is prepared as the same note, but then it resolves down when it resolves. A retardation is the opposite of that. It resolves upward. I did mention that if you're going to do a retardation, it's always going to be by semitone. So here you have B natural that's resolving upward to C. The B natural here is prepared in the previous chord. So retardations pretty much always happen at the cadence. You have a 5 chord. This is the leading tone. The leading tone is just tied over. You bring in the 1 chord here, but the leading tone is sort of hanging on, and then it eventually resolves up. And that's often simultaneous with an actual suspension. So here in the 5/7 chord, the F is the 7th. It's tied over. You bring in the C, the tonic, but in the same way that you are maintained a leading tone that's going to go up, you're also maintained the 7th that's going to eventually go down to, 7th above 7th of the 5/7 chord, which is scale degree 4, eventually resolving down to scale degree 3, third of the chord. And then there's just a little decoration. And it's slower than the other decorations because this is held longer. This duration of suspension is 2 whole beats, just like with here. Let's give it a second listen. Now, I hope that you listened to the retardation. I feel like I should play it again to make you listen to the retardation because it's a familiar sound. You'll recognize it, but you'll also, I would like to prime it so that you do recognize it, so that it becomes like an idea in your mind that you do recognize when you hear it. I also just want to point out, also this time, as we're going along, look at the figures. So these are all just weird figures. 7-3, 6 is fine, 7 is fine. 9-4 going to 8-3. It's crazy. I mean, it looks crazy. We don't see that very often but you recognize if you put the parentheses around these again, the 9 and the 4th are not real. It's the 8 and the 3rd that are real. Again, with 5-2 going to 6-3, the 5-2 are not real. It's the 6-3 that are real. Here we can guess the 7, 6, and 4. Maybe the 7 is real, but the 6 and the 4 are not real. Eventually, this is a 7-5-3 chord, right? Just root position. And this 7-4, these guys are not real. That's eventually 8-3. Same as 8-5-3 or just 5-3. One more listen. You're going to pay attention to the figures, and then when we get here, make sure you're listening for the retardation. Okay, cool sound. Now we have done all the hard stuff. Now we just have a couple of easy-ish things and then just some practice. So this is the pedal tone. All the pedal tone is a tone played with the pedal, or that's how it gets its name. If you're playing the organ and then you're doing a bunch of fancy stuff with your right and left hand, but you just hold down one of the pedals with your foot, that is a pedal tone. You could do it in an upper voice, but pedal tones usually come in the bass. So basically, and you almost always have a pedal tone either on scale degree 1 on the tonic or on scale degree 5, the dominant. Bach has a pedal tone in basically every piece. So if you look at any of the inventions or the preludes or even the fugues, I think toward the end, you're going to get to a place where he expands the dominant for a long time. And he does it by just like putting a dominant pedal in the bass. So here, this piece is in C minor. He would just put a G in the bass. He could do whatever he wants in the upper voices. And then that G pedal makes it feel like you're really on 5 for a long time, no matter what the upper voices are doing. And then once he gets back to tonic, which he does here, and then ends the piece, he often puts the tonic pedal in the bass, does a whole bunch of other stuff. Like he's got the tonic pedal in the bass, but you can see the chords. He's got a 1 chord, but then he's got a 4, and then he's got a 7-7, right? There's not a tonic note in 7-7. The 7-7 is B, D, F, A flat. There's no C in that chord. So the only way to make sense of this chord is it's a 7-7 chord, but it happens to have a non-chord tone in the bass, a C, and then back to 1 again. And again, he does the same thing here, B, D, F, A flat, 7-7 with a C in the bass. So I am going to play this for you, but the one thing I want you to think is, let's say you're going along in the music and you're analyzing it. You see this, you're like, oh, that's a B diminished chord in first inversion. Oh, that's a C chord. Oh, that's a G chord. Oh, that's a C chord. Ooh, C major. Okay. Oh, well, that looks like F minor in second inversion. We haven't done second inversions yet. That B is just a chromatic neighbor tone. Then you get to this chord, F, A flat, B, D, C, and you're going to be like, I don't know what it is. There's no chord that makes sense with F, A flat, B, D, C. So you have to say, okay, maybe the C is a non-chord tone. Then this would be a B, D, F, A flat. It's a B fully diminished chord. In the key of C, that makes sense. It's a 7 fully diminished that happens to have a C in the bass. And that extends through there, and it extends all the way through there. And then you only get C major at the very end, another Picardy third. And the one last thing I'll say about this is, look that Laitz has 7-7. Like if you got rid of the C, the F is in the bass, which would make this 7-4-3. But there isn't a real bass note for this. So you could just put it in root position. That's not something you have to worry too much about. It's just that there's no right answer to what inversion this chord is in if it has a bass pedal tone. Let's listen. Here we go. Oh, shoot. I'm going to do that again because I actually tried to cue it. I don't know if you heard me talking, but I cued it at the wrong place. So I think the recording starts pretty much right on the downbeat of the measure that we have. Lovely. Okay, now for the moment you've all been waiting for, anticipation. Okay, I'm going to play that one more time. That one's also hard to hear when it comes in. So basically, at the very beginning, you have a quiet-ish chord that comes right before this. And then when this chord comes in, it's kind of loud. And you can listen for the bass. So if you follow along with the bass, you could do that. Or okay, so one more time just to get a listen to the excerpt. The main thing we're talking about right in this screen is this anticipation that's here. And the point is these are non-chord tones. These are not accented non-chord tones. They're unaccented. But they're in this chapter just because we just didn't talk about them before. And basically, these notes are going to be chord tones. And here they're non-chord tones, but they're just an anticipation of what's going to come here. But you do get a nice crunchy moment. This is a G minor chord, and you get a C sharp and an A in it, right? So it's nice and crunchy. Let's give it a listen. Here we go. This is a great excerpt because it has all kinds of fancy stuff that we like to talk about, like to review. And it's also, man, is it not beautiful? I think the recording and the playing is really beautiful. Okay, so Phrygian cadence toward the end. What's a Phrygian cadence? Oh yeah, 4/6 going to 5. Scale degree 6 in the bass going to scale degree 5. We're in D minor here. And this is a 4 chord, right? G minor going to A major. These notes, right? We just talked about them, anticipation of these notes. That's not hard to remember. I meant to introduce these later, but I guess I forgot. So I marked here purple, red, red, blue. Why did I do that? These are the same notes that are here. A D that's tied over to this D, D, C sharp. Okay. Why am I doing that? You can guess. It doesn't have to do with anticipation. It is suspension. So let's check it out. Remind ourselves how the suspension works. The suspension is a dissonance on a strong beat. So I made these red notes the dissonance. And it's the same thing that's in the violin here, the second violin. But why did I redo it? Well, I can't remember why I brought it down here. But I think you'll at least be able to see with the... Yeah, no, I don't know. I didn't need to redo it down here. You could just read it up here if you want. So consonants, dissonance, consonants. So let's do it here. This D is a dissonance. It's tied over from a D that is a consonance, right? This chord here is G minor. This is a D minor. This is an E diminished seventh that has a D. So the D is in all those chords. It's a consonant. So the D is tied over to here. Here it's a dissonance because it's a fourth above the bass. It looks like a D minor in first and in second inversion, but just ignore that. Pretend this is a dissonance, the F, the red D. Okay, and then still here it's a dissonance, and here you can really see it's a dissonance. We're in an A chord, A, E, should be A, C sharp, E, but the D is a non-chord tone. So there it's really clearly suspended over, and it's going to resolve down on a weak beat to C sharp. Okay, so our preparation comes beforehand, our suspension, and then our resolution, and let's just see that in the score. Preparation is there, suspension is there, it's the fourth, and then the fourth has to resolve down to the third. And we can see the same thing in the keyboard part. Preparation, suspension, resolution. Notice that this D has been attacked twice. That's okay. Here it's tied over, here it's not tied over. So It's still being prepared, even though it's like restruck here, and then it's even restruck a second time. Oh, shoot, I think there was one other thing I was going to say, but I don't know what it was. Yep, don't know. Okay, now we get to practice. These are all examples from the last presentation. So if you didn't watch the last presentation, spoiler alert. So Laitz is very nice. Not everybody knows that, but he's given us the chords below the music here, along with the TPDDT. So I gave us a list of things to do. We're just going to do these, and then we'll figure out what kind of non-chord tones are in this. So we have to know what the chords are. So we want to identify the non-chord tones, right? If that's our goal. First, we have to find what the chords are. Then we're just going to look for the notes that are not in the chords. And these are going to be the non-chord tones. And otherwise, yeah. Okay. And then what I say here is just note that you do have to figure out the right duration for the chord. And this is kind of tricky. Here, he did mark the chords for us. And otherwise, we would have to look at it and just try to figure out that it's one chord per bar. So if we ignore the melody, we get an E, B, E, G sharp. All the notes in this whole bar are E, B, and G sharp. And even in the melody, B, B, E. So there's no non-chord tones in this bar. And, the A might be a non-chord tone leading up to it, but I'm just ignoring that because we don't have any chord here. So in this bar, again, looking at the piano part, A, C sharp, E, A. Everything in this bar is A, C sharp, E. Here we have a C sharp and an E, but this D sharp is a non-chord tone. Oh my... It's so, all I had to do is press the button and it was there. It was like the thing already knew. Okay, so B, B, D sharp, F sharp. It's a B major chord. And then in the melody here, we have G sharp, F sharp, B. So everything is a non-chord tone. Everything is a chord tone except for that G sharp. So I'm just marking them for now, and then we'll figure out what they are. And then in the last bar, all the notes, let's just go back, say we don't know. All the notes are E, B, E, G sharp. It's all E major. The G sharp is in there. So everything except the A. So now we know which are the non-chord tones. Now we just have to figure out which kind they are. When we do this, we're going to ask, are they passing? Are they neighbors? Are they incomplete neighbors? Are they accented or unaccented? Are they chromatic? Are they just diatonic? If they're accented, are they accented passing tones, accented neighbors, Appoggiaturas, or suspensions? If they're unaccented, is it anticipation? I guess if it's accented and it's in the bass, it could be a pedal tone too. Ooh, lots to do. So let's get to work. Number 2, figure out what kinds of non-chord tones these are and label them. The first one, I just told you what it was, but it's a non-chord tone. It's accented relative to where it's going to and where it came from. It's all going in one direction and it's stepwise. So which kind is it? Accented passing tone. Same is going to be with this guy. We've already circled it, so we know it's a non-chord tone. It's going downward by step. It's accented relative to where it goes to and where it comes from. So it's an accented passing tone. And the last one, same thing, accented relative to where it goes to. And it's passing all in some way. So this excerpt, I almost think we should listen to it again. Let's listen. So the composer is using a very tiny little economy of means. The chords are 1, 4, 5, and 1. And the only non-chord tones, except maybe that A there, are accented passing tones. And everything is going down. Kind of nice. I think it's Donizetti. Can't remember now, actually. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, accented passing tone. Okay. You ready for more practice? If you want, you can pause the video. But, I don't have a recording of it. Well, I'm just going to have to sing it for you. Yeah, so, beautiful dreamer, wake unto me. Starlight and dewdrops are waiting for thee. Okay, and then let's go ahead and sing the bass. Like do, fa, sol, do, and do, hum, 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 ha, hum, hum, ha, 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 hum, hum, ha, ha. Okay, now we did it. We performed it. So let's look for non-chord tones. In the first bar, Laitz has given us the chords. There's a 1 chord. It's an E-flat major chord. So the only thing in bar 1, survey says, is, identify the non-chord chords. Find all the chord tones, blah, blah, blah. You have to figure out the right chord. 1 chord per bar. So first measure, we got a D there. That's a non-chord tone. In the next bar, we have an F minor chord in first inversion. It's a 2-6, and there's only 1 non-chord tone there. In the third bar, we have a B-flat major chord, or B-flat dominant, because there's an A-flat in there. And there's going to be a couple of non-chord tones there, the C and the other C. And then this G is a non-chord tone. And everything else is a chord tone. And then that's it, none in the last bar. So now we get to figure out what kinds of non-chord tones these are, and we get to label them. So in the first one, unaccented relative to where it's coming, and it's a neighbor. So it's just a plain old N. Maybe we should read what I wrote here. For each dotted quarter duration, yeah. So for the duration of a dotted quarter note, the first eighth note is strong, and the second and third are weak. So strong, weak, weak, strong, 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 weak, weak, strong. Okay, like that. So you need to be aware of that. And then beat 1, of course, is going to be stronger. Da, 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 da. Da, 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 da. In this particular piece, it doesn't matter, but you would need to think about both of those things when you're figuring this out. So the first one we know is a neighbor tone. Second one is also a neighbor tone, but note it's chromatic because it's the leading tone to the F, but we're in the key of E flat. So that's a chromatic neighbor, CN. Here, this is a little bit tricky, but B flat, D, C going down to B flat is a neighbor tone. Here it's unaccented neighbor. Oh, shoot, passing tone. It's passing from, B flat, or D down to B flat. But then this one is also still in there. I don't really know what it is. So you can kind of call it an accented passing tone if you go from D to an accented C down to B flat. There's not an awesome interpretation there because, yeah, it's just weird. And then that was just an unaccented passing tone. Okay, let's do some Verdi. Okay, that's a pretty awesome piece. So it's from the overture to La Forza del Destino, which is an opera by Verdi. Okay, so I gave you just the top line here, and I just made it a little bit bigger so we could see it. Let's, yeah, sorry. Oh my God, it's gonna play again. I got a good idea. I'm going to advance us through where the non-chord tones are, just so we could do it kind of fast. But you could tell in this first part, oh man. Yeah. In the first part, it's all just a 1 chord. I'm just going to get rid of the tunes. Pause. Okay. Are we ready? I fixed it. So we're going to identify the non-chord tones. We have to first find all the chords. Laitz has already marked it for us. It's just a 1 chord for these 4 bars. We have to figure out the right duration, because there's all this stuff in there. You might get confused. You might be like, oh, that's a 1 chord. That's a 2 chord. That's a 3 chord. Don't do that. Figure out, look at the left hand and see that's all just A minor, A minor, A minor, A minor the whole time. Okay. And maybe I should point out to you that even though the key signature says 1 sharp, you have to pay attention to the music. The music is definitely an A minor. So composers might put a section within the music, like the larger pieces in G major, or E minor, but this little section is in A minor. Okay, so that's a nonchord tone. The B is not in the A minor chord. That B is not in the A minor chord. That B is not in the A minor chord, nor is that. That B is not in the A minor chord. Huh, they're all Bs. Interesting. And then you have an F and an F, and those Fs are not in the A minor chord. How do we know that? It's just because like every other note in this whole little excerpt is either an A or a C or an E. So now we have to figure out what kinds these are. So I put a little note that the 30-second notes are all pretty weak. I did circle this B. Technically, the first of the 16th notes, first of a 30-second note. Oh God, there's a little dot there. That would be the first of the 30-second notes. A would be second, B would be third, C would be fourth. The third is the next strongest, and then the second and the fourth. So meaning this B is technically a tiny bit stronger than that C and stronger than that A. I know that is like very hair-splitting, but if we want to know if this B is accented relative to where it goes to, it comes from, it is. And then this B and that B are both accented relative to where they're going and where they're coming from. This B is accented relative to where it's coming from and where it's going to. And then these notes are moving in this direction. That's passing. This is passing going up. These are passing going up. These are going to be neighbors. This is passing going down, and that's passing going up. So we have accented passing tone, accented passing tone, accented passing tone, accented passing, accented passing, like little tiny accented passing tones. Then a neighbor tone. This one is weird because it gets reattacked, right? It's like you could call this an anticipated accented neighbor, or you could call this a neighbor and then like an accented neighbor. So I put a little question mark. Then accented passing, accented passing. Okay, we're copying. Yeah, you get to listen again. Okay, now we go on to the next screen. I've copied this over from the past. We have all the same analysis above. Now we just have the second system as well. So you can see in the second system that now we get a 4 chord and a 5 chord. And so in here, this is now a D minor chord for the whole thing. We can look at the left hand and see it's just D, F, A, D, F, A, D, F, A. So the E, okay, give it a listen from the beginning. Sorry. I didn't mean to stop it. Oh, God. Okay. So, I guess I just threw all these in there. So there's that E, that E, that E. Those are all passing tones. Now they're weaker, right? This is the fourth 30-second note. So it's weaker than the D and weaker than the F. So it's just a normal passing tone, not accented passing tone. But that doesn't really matter. There's so little, who cares? Accented passing tone, E going to D, E going to F. Notice that when we are in the A minor chord, the B is the ninth above the A, right? It's the ninth of the chord, or scale degree 2. When we're in this D minor chord, this E, that's the accented passing tone again, right, is still the ninth of the chord. So it's like he takes the same idea and just does it up a fourth on the 4 chord. And then in here, and then we have another neighbor. Again, this is scale degree 3, 4, back to 3. That's different scale degrees than in here. This is scale degrees 5, 6, 5. So this inner voice is different, but it's still the same rhythm, and it's still doing neighbors. And then in here, we do have the C that's a neighbor, but notice that, like, weirdly, this is an E dominant chord. Both the D and the E are consonances. Okay, that's just to show you that Verdi is pretty cool. Accented passing tone, accented neighbor tone. If you go B, C, B, this is just a grace note. You usually don't label grace notes, but just to be fun, I just tried to figure out which one it would be. And if it's coming from a B, and then this little tiny grace note is going to a C, and you assume, if you assume it's off the beat, it's just a weak little note right before this guy. If you assume it's on the beat, it's an appoggiatura. It's an accented incomplete neighbor. But like I said, normally don't label grace notes. I do want to have you listen to the whole excerpt one more time, and so you can listen to, So what's important about that is like this is all very simple chords, 1, 4, 5, and 1. Just a tonic, predominant, dominant, tonic progression. But at the same time, it's like a super characteristic sound. It's really evocative. It's really powerful emotionally. It's, almost creepy. And that has to do with these non-chord tones, with these accented passing tones, this accented neighbor at the end, this neighbor and then accented neighbor that's going on in there, and this da-da-da-da, and just these, I wouldn't say there's anything that special about these passing tones or these accented passing tones, just that they're just fast runs that are scalar. Okay. So you might want to pause right now and see if you can find the non-chord tones yourself. Hello and welcome back. So at the beginning, we don't have any. This is all D major. And then this is a D major, and then A major. So no non-chord tones in the whole beginning. Then in here, you get a tiny one, the D sharp. Look at that. And then this little thingy here, you get a series of non-chord tones. Now, how do I know those guys are non-chord tones? They're so little. Oh, yeah. They're little, they're like 16th notes, right? But they're on the beat because they're so we kind of know because we have to look at the chord. So the chord here is G, E, B. So it's an E minor chord. The A is a non-chord tone. The G is a chord tone. The F sharp is a non-chord tone. The E is a chord tone. D is a non-chord tone. C sharp is a chord tone in this A7 chord. B is a non-chord tone, A is a chord tone. B is a non-chord tone, C sharp is a chord tone. So let's label them now that we found them. That one is a chromatic. Oh, that's wrong. It's chromatic passing tone. CPT, chromatic passing tone, not chromatic neighbor. That one's accented passing tone, accented passing tone, accented passing tone, accented passing tone, accented passing tone. Okay, I think that's a really good job, Haydn. Now, let's look in the first bar. We have an F minor, and the only note in there that's not an F minor is E natural. How do we know the E natural is not the seventh of the chord? It's because you wouldn't have a minor chord with a major seventh, so that it would make the quality of the chord wrong. So the E natural is a non-chord tone. There in the second bar, we have a 5-6-5 chord, E, C, B flat, G. B flat is still in the chord, C is still in the chord, but the D flat is not. So that's going to be an incomplete neighbor, looks like, accented relative to the C. But we won't get ahead of ourselves. In this measure, we have another F minor chord, so the B flat is not in the F minor chord, and the E is not in the F minor chord. In this measure, we have a 2-6, so we have a G diminished chord for 2 beats, and then a C7. So in the G diminished, this is the only chord, the note that's not there. Oh, wait, we have an A flat. And then in the C7 chord, we got another A flat, and then we got an F there. Everything else is in the chord. And then the very last bar, we ain't got nothing. We got just chord tones, all just F minor. So now we have to figure out what kinds these are. In the first bar, the E natural is accented relative to the F. It's moving there by step. It's an incomplete neighbor. So it's an accented incomplete neighbor, which we know is an appoggiatura. I put in parentheses a question mark. Would this be a chromatic appoggiatura? And the answer is I don't think so. It's in the key of F minor. But if you really wanted, but let's say we were in F minor and we had a B natural going to a C, then I guess that would be a chromatic appoggiatura. Okay, this is just a reminder. Appoggiatura is the same thing as accented incomplete neighbor. Okay, next one. We got another appoggiatura, right? The D flat going to the C. It's accented relative to the C. It's an incomplete neighbor. Then the B flat, so we're in measure 3, we're in the F minor chord. The B flat is just an incomplete neighbor to the A flat. It's sometimes called an escape tone, but we just call them incomplete neighbors in this class. Then we have another incomplete neighbor that's E going to F, but it's accented relative to F, so it's an appoggiatura. Yeah, sometimes called escape tone. That E is an appoggiatura. And then in the G diminished chord that's here, the D flat, B flat, those are chord tones. The one in between, the C is a non-chord tone, so that's just passing. There's an A flat here, but then it kind of gets held over again, so that's weird. But this is a non-chord, the A flat is a non-chord tone in either one. That's passing, we're calling that kind of accented passing. And then this F is also accented passing. And I think I made this orange just because there's so much chaos there, and I wanted to, yeah. Okay, that's the only reason for the orange. Okay, good job, Haydn. Oh, hey, you're raising your hand again, Haydn. All right, you want to get another piece for us? Let's hear it. Right. These are all pieces just from the last lecture. Just wanted to reuse stuff that you already know, and just to show you that these non-chord tones are kind of all over the place. And here's how to analyze them. So, as with a lot of these excerpts, 1 chord, 4 chord, 5 chord, 1 chord, tonic, predominant, dominant, tonic. That's a little cadence, perfect authentic cadence. In the first bar, there's no non-chord tones. In the second bar, we have a 4 chord, a G major chord. The C sharp is going to be a non-chord tone. The A sharp is a non-chord tone. Oh yeah, what kind is the C sharp? It is an accented passing tone. It's moving down from D to B, and it's accented relative to the B. It's not accented relative to the D, so you probably should think about it as accented relative to where it's going, where it resolves. The A sharp is a non-chord tone. What's an A sharp doing in a G major chord? Well, it is a neighbor tone, right? B, A sharp, B. It's accented relative to where it's going, so it's an accented neighbor. Let's see if I wrote it correct. I didn't even label it? Well, there we go. I got a label. I guess I just did these out of order. So we're skipping this one. There's no non-chord tones there. This is a non-chord tone, the F sharp. We're in an A chord this whole time. A, C sharp, E, G. F sharp is a non-chord tone going to E, so it's accented relative to that. This D is accented relative to the C sharp that is going to. And then we're back in 1 here. D major chord. B is accented relative to A. G is accented relative to F sharp. E is accented relative to D. What kinds are these? This is accented passing, accented passing, accented passing, accented passing, accented passing. And then last one. Oh, it should be an ACN, accented chromatic neighbor, because of the A sharp. Jeez. Hope I don't get fired. Okay, so Mozart. So the thing repeats itself. It's just like the rhythm is a little bit different at the end. It goes to an authentic cadence instead of a half cadence. But you heard it twice. I put in some chords there. Excuse me, 1 chord, 5, 6, 5. I put not just 5, 6, but 5, 6, 5 because there's the D. It's the 7th of the chord. Here you have a 6, 7, excuse me. F sharp, A, C, E. Or sorry, F sharp, A, C sharp, E. There's no C sharp in this whole measure, but it's implied. So 6, 7 you haven't seen yet, but anyway, who cares? And then 5, 6 chord, and then back to 1 again. So that's all just an expansion of 1, as we'll see in a minute, and then going to 2, 6, and then 5. Now, this weird thing, this is not something we've seen before, but 5, 6, or you can think of this as 5, 6, 5. I mean 5, 6, 5 or 5, 6. So right, this thing going to some other chord and then back to 5, 6. So think of these guys as a neighboring structure. The bass goes G sharp down to F sharp and back to G sharp again. So that's a weird neighboring structure. And then, but that whole thing is a larger neighbor within 1, 5, 6, 5, 6, 5, back to 5, 6 again, and then back to 1 again. So I'm just doing that to show you that you can use these contrapuntal expansion ideas from previous chapters to make sense of this passage, even though it's, I don't know, it's not exactly one of the standard models that we've seen, but it still makes sense with them. Now for the non-chord tones, let's circle them. So we have some neighbor tones here, A, B, A, C sharp, D, C sharp. Again, neighbors there, same idea. And then these are like, we call these, it's not double neighbors, but in the same way that we had double suspensions before, you have the same decoration in different voices, but this is a third. A up to C sharp is a third, B up to D is a third, A to C sharp is a third. So they're doing the same thing in parallel thirds. And then toward the end here, that E is a non-chord tone. So the real note is the D, D, B, D. So if it's a B, D, F sharp chord, presumably that makes it 2-6. And then here he has these guys in parentheses, both of them C sharp and A, that are eventually going to resolve down to E, G sharp, B. Eventually resolve down to 5, so the A and the C sharp are non-chord tones. So what kinds are all these things? The first one we said are neighbors, second ones are neighbors. That E is an appoggiatura. Why is that? Because it's accented relative to the D. And it's a neighbor. It's an incomplete neighbor. So accented incomplete neighbor is appoggiatura. And then here, these are both accented passing tones. So the D down to C sharp, down to B. So the C sharp is accented relative to the B. Similarly, the A is accented relative to the G sharp, and it's also coming from a B. It's kind of hard to see. But these guys are both accented passing tones. Okay. I feel like we haven't heard from Schubert in a while, so let's fix that right now. So again, that excerpt repeats, and just the very end is different. In here, thank you, Laitz. Laitz found the chords for us. So here we have 2 chords per bar, 1-6, then 1, 5-4-3, and then 5-7. 1, 1, 6, and 4, so 3 chords in that bar, and then 5 for that bar. So, right, that's the first thing we have to do is figure out what the chords are, figure out the harmonic rhythm. Now we can look for where all the non-chord tones are relative to knowing where the chords are. So in the first bar, there are no non-chord tones. In the second bar, there are no non-chord tones, right? We have to look at the melody too. In the third bar, there are no non-chord tones. Look at that. That's amazing. Fourth bar, he puts these in parentheses. Those are non-chord tones. So let's give it a little circle. And we're just going to ignore this decoration there because it makes it easier. This G sharp is going down to that F sharp. Then, yeah, so we're going to call this G sharp an accented passing tone. It's coming from A flat, goes to G sharp. We're ignoring these 2 guys, which are just a decoration, and the G sharp eventually goes to F sharp. So it's accented relative to the F sharp, and it's a non-chord tone because we're saying this is a 5 chord. B flat, D, F, and the G. I think I might have said G sharp, but it's a G natural. A flat, G is just on its way to F. So at that point, it's a chord tone. Here, it's a non-chord tone. So it's what kind is it? Accented passing tone. That same note is here, right, in the piano part, and it's still going to an F. G is going to F. But interestingly, look at that. It doesn't come from an A flat. So it's exactly the same note, but we have to give it a different label. It's an appoggiatura in this case. I mean, that's just because of our labeling system, right? It obviously sounds the same, but it isn't coming from a step above, so it's not an accented passing tone. It's an appoggiatura. It is an incomplete neighbor to the F that's accented incomplete neighbor. Okay, this E flat is also a non-chord tone in the 5 chord, right? The chord is B flat, D, F. The E flat is a non-chord tone. It's a 4th above the bass. It's going to resolve to a 3rd. We'll see this on the next screen. And the next screen, by the way, is the last screen of the presentation. So this is a 4-3 suspension. It's suspended here. It's going to be resolved there, and it's prepared in the previous one. And then this guy in there is the A natural in a B flat chord is just a chromatic neighbor. Now, I know that you're going to be thinking, how do I know this? Because I already saw this presentation, and it's already written there. It says, why is this not the 7th of the chord? So if you looked at it, you might say, okay, I want to figure out what this chord is. Maybe you can figure out that these are not real notes, and you have B flat, D, F, A. You might think, okay, that's a B flat 7 chord. B flat, D, F, A. But what is the quality of that chord? B flat, D, F, A, if we're talking A natural, that is a B flat major 7th chord. And the 5-7 in any key is not major major, right? 5/7 is major minor. So that is not the seventh of the chord. That A is allowed to be there, but it is not a functional note. It's not functioning as a seventh. It's just a chromatic neighbor to the B flat. It would make the chord the wrong quality. If that were the seventh, it would make it a major major chord rather than major minor. Okay, so now just on the last screen, which we have here, we are going to take a closer look at this suspension just to review some of the stuff that we've been talking about. Okay, this little passage, I kept these arrows, but I put them in gray. You can't really see them very well. That red thing is supposed to come a little bit later, but that's okay. So the stuff that's in gray is just to remind us what we were talking about before. Let's pay attention to this E flat that's here. Above the bass, it's a fourth. And a fourth is a dissonance, right? So what kind of dissonance is it, right? We could be asking that question. Well, it's going to resolve down to the D. Let's see what comes next. Okay, so it's going to resolve down to the D, and then it's a chord tone. So it's an upper neighbor, in a sense, to the D. Let's see where it comes from. And it comes from another E flat that is itself a consonance against the bass. So we're going to say that this is a 4/3 suspension, and I'll spell that out a little bit more, but it's a fourth that's going to resolve down to a third. Yeah, 4/3 S, and it's a dissonance. This guy is tedious. So it was prepared, that exact note E flat was prepared in the previous chord, even though it's restruck, and it resolves down by step. It's in its resolution. So it was prepared in the previous chord as a consonance. That P is a consonance. Oh, yeah. And that's because it's a fifth. I'm always measuring it against the bass. So A flat against E flat is a fifth. B flat against E flat, that same E flat, is now a fourth, which is a dissonance, and it has to resolve down to a third. B flat against D is a third. It's a consonance. Okay. I believe I have a little recording of first I'm going to play the bass, A flat, B flat, and this alto line, E flat, D. So you can hear just those voices. Oh, that was loud for me. Okay, now with all the notes. Okay, so it's not like if you listen to this piece by Schubert, I don't even remember what piece it is, but it's not like when you're listening to it, you're going to pick out this E flat and be like, yeah, that note, that's a suspension. However, it's the fabric. All these things are in the fabric of music, of all the music we listen to, all the music we write. You don't have to know what these terms are to use like a dissonance in your music or a neighbor tone, right? People do it naturally. But they are the things that give music its character. So they are pretty exciting. At first, it feels a little bit unexciting to get so taxonomic about this stuff, but I hope this gave you at least a very clear introduction to what these terms mean. I'm sure it was extremely boring. I recognize that, and I'm okay with it. I'm okay with some things being boring. This is just, for this one, I wanted it to be clear. And then sometimes, I guess, being clear is a little boring. But anyway, hopefully you got even a scrape of a little tiny scrap of enjoyment from this. And if not, I don't know. Hopefully you'll watch another video again sometime and you'll enjoy it a little bit more. Okay, hope you guys are doing well. Thanks for watching.